All right, welcome to Module 3, Written Communication. In this module, we're going to talk about writing messages and specifically looking at organizing, formatting, using plain language, and writing emails. So just a quick overview. By the end of this module, you'll understand the power and impact of writing at work. We'll spend just a couple of minutes there. We'll talk about how to organize messages for the greatest impact. We'll then move into document formatting techniques that improve engagement. And then we'll talk about the concept of plain language, what that is, and how to use it effectively. And then we'll also talk about writing emails, email writing tips, tools, and best practices. So just to kind of see how this will be broken out. We'll start in 3.1, writing at work. We'll look at the power and impact of strong writing and then the qualities of effective writing, or qualities of effective written communication. In 3.2, we'll address organizing your message. We'll talk about the rhetorical effect of organization, the direct and indirect methods, the problem solution method, and the IMRAD, I-M-R-A-D method of organizing. And then in 3.3, we'll talk about formatting your documents. We'll address how audiences skim, scan, and satisfies. We'll work through ABC, or what's sometimes called bite, snack, meal formatting approaches, and we'll look at margins, spacing, and readability, convention style guides, and common formats. And then in 3.4, we'll look at using plain language. We'll talk about what plain language is. How that helps users find, understand, and use the content they're looking for. We'll talk about some very specific plain language concepts like active voice, effective words, verbs, and nouns, sentences, paragraphs, and parallel structure, and then providing examples. And then lastly, in 3.5, we'll look at writing better emails. We'll talk about the concept of inbox zero. We'll look at email etiquette, best practices, effective subject lines, and we'll walk through separation, bullets, lists, some highlighting techniques, and then we'll talk a little bit about emojis and other visual tools in your written emails. All right, well, without further delay, let's go ahead and move into Module 3.1, Writing at Work. Module 3.1, Writing at Work. All right, let's go ahead and start with this thought. First of all, effective writing has a powerful impact at work. And while that might sound obvious, if you can write well, it can dramatically change your ability to work efficiently and to also get people to trust and listen to your message. So let's go through this step by step. First of all, good writing or strong writing is more likely to be read. Again, while that might seem obvious, the reality is if you write well and your messages are strong and they're tailored to your audience, they're more likely to read through the entire message and then act upon it. If your writing is not strong, people are more likely to skip it, delete it quickly, or just scan over some key points, but not really pay close attention. So it's more likely to be read if it is strong writing. Second is more likely to be persuasive and credible. If you want people to act upon what your message is, if you want them to think in a new way or to do something differently, they're more likely to do that if your message is written well, if it's good, strong communication. Good writing is also more efficient and useful. When you can write well, you're less likely to have to clarify your messages multiple times, and your audience is more likely to understand it quickly and not have follow-up questions. So it's more efficient for both the person reading and for you as the writer writing the message. And lastly, strong writing builds confidence and trust. People are more likely to have high confidence in you as a professional. They're more likely to trust you as an individual. Again, whether that's fair or not, people tend to trust and have more confidence in people who write well. So you can see collectively the value of having strong writing skills at work. Well, I want to share a thought here that comes from Penn State University's Business Career Center. They say that even in engineering and IT occupations, which many would not associate with strong requirements for writing skills, writing is the second most requested baseline skill, and these baseline skills account for 1 in 4 skills requested by other highly technical jobs like healthcare and finance. The reality is, regardless of what profession you're in, writing is going to matter. You're more likely to be successful in your career if you can write well. So a few thoughts here. Knowledge in your field is often assumed. People tend to believe that you already have the skills that you need as a requirement, kind of a baseline requirement for working in that field. It's writing, though, that will set you apart from the rest. If you can write well, you're more likely to be promoted, to advance in your career, to get clients and customers to trust and to, to work with you closely. And the last thought here is the written communication is many times the first interaction you have with a client or employer. It's what builds that first impression. So again, strong written communication really helps establish you in your career. Okay, so what makes what are the what are the qualities of effective writing at work? Well, good writing, first of all, is audience driven, is tailored to the purpose and context, to your specific audience and to their needs. It is helpful. We should always be writing with the intent to help other people, to answer their questions, to give them advice, to give them direction, but it should be helpful. And then also in terms of audience driven, it's language and diction appropriate. In other words, we're using terms that are appropriate to the knowledge and experience and reading level of the people to whom we are writing. All right, good writing is also concise. It's very focused. We understand what our purpose is, and that purpose is very clear to our audience. It provides only what is needed and nothing in addition to that, but it provides everything that our audiences will need to know. And it is organized for ease of use. We're going to get into these specifics later in the module. This is kind of the brief overview here. Also, as effective writing is very specific. So it is exact in terms of times, dates, and processes. If you're going to tell somebody to get something done by a certain time and date, or give them a process, it needs to be very, very specific. Also, effective writing uses examples. People tend to learn better and understand concepts more if you provide examples. So you integrate those into your writing. Also, effective writing is conversational, meaning that we're writing to humans. It's a person-to-person exchange. Even if it's a website, we want to be thinking of communicating to a human being as if we're having a conversation to them. Let me be right in the you and the we voice rather than in third person. You say you and we as if we're having a conversation together. It is personality infused. There's a personality of the business or of the individual that is writing this message. It is relatable. The person that reads the message can relate to it and find it relevant to their lives. And it has an authentic feel that we're writing as if the person we're talking to, that we care about them and we have empathy towards them. And then lastly, it is accurate. Accurate is a few different things. First of all, it's accurate in grammar and mechanics, so it is structurally and grammatically correct in the language that we are communicating in. The content and research is accurate, meaning that it is information that people can trust and lean on. If it needs citations or references, those are cited correctly, and that information is there, and it just follows good ethical practices. So these are the good qualities, or the qualities of good and effective writing, that we're going to talk about these in more detail as we go through the rest of Module 3. All right, let's go ahead and get into the specifics of organizing your message next in Module 3.2. All right, Module 3.2, organizing your message. In this module, we're going to go specifically into how to think about organizing your message in a few different common formats that we use in business and professional communication. So let's look at this. First of all, organizational structure has a rhetorical effect. What that means is that the order of your content will change the way people engage with and think about your message. If you structure a message one way, people will think about your message in a certain way. And as you change that, that has an effect on their understanding and on their emotional reaction to it. So you want to be very conscious about the order in which you put information. That affects readability, it affects understandability, and affects the emotional impact and reaction. Now, you've probably heard of some, or at least read many different types of organizational structures, even if you weren't aware of it. For example, in journalism, we often use what's called the inverted pyramid organizational strategy. And this is where you put the most newsworthy thing first, the most important thing. We call that the lead. And then you'll move into the body, which is kind of an explanation, background, or any kind of ensuing controversies that have happened because of the initial news. And then at the tail, you'll put the conclusion there. And you'll see that this organizational structure is effective for brief news stories in a competitive landscape. It's meant to grab attention and give the most important information. So Journalists have realized that if they don't put the most newsworthy thing right up front in the first sentence or two, people are less likely to read the entire message. So this is an approach that encourages more engagement. It goes back to the days of newspaper when people or news industries were trying to get people to read the entire newspaper, and so they would read all of the short stories. There's also a lot of competition, and if you're trying to sell newspapers on newsstands, people will only look at and buy those stories where they can get the most news in the least amount of space. So the inverted pyramid works very well for that approach. The martini glass is a similar style that's often used in news writing, but it has a very specific kind of chronological order. So if you're telling the story of a crime, or even if you're reporting like a sporting event where you're going through how the game or the event played out, you kind of follow this method where you start with the inverted pyramid beginning. So if it's a crime, you say who committed the crime, what happened, but then you go through a chronology of events. And the same would be in a sporting event where you say who won, who lost, but then you go through the chronology of events. And then at the end, there's some kicker. Maybe there's a twist in plot, or there's a final thought about the game or the event, or maybe there's something funny in a particular story that you're telling, kind of a twist there. So you'll see this is effective for pulling people in, giving them a recap of the details, and leaving them with a unique perspective, punchline, or plot twist. So it's very similar to the inverted pyramid, but it has a more chronological or process and organizational structure to it. A third type we often use is called the hourglass. This is for more long-form journalism or nonfiction. This is where you start with that inverted pyramid, but then there's a twist in events, and you have a more lengthy explanation. So you'll see this is effective for premises that require a detailed narration for clarification and interest. So really complex stories are often used in nonfiction human interest stories. Or another one you may have learned in high school or elementary school as a youth, or maybe even in college, is what we call the 5-paragraph essay. So this is effective for having an argument that you try to get people to get on board with your particular argument or perspective. When you have supporting evidence, you have an introduction or a thesis, 2, 3, 4 maybe supporting evidences, and then a conclusion. This is effective for establishing a basic argument or supported with evidence to persuade an audience. So these are some of the different types of organizational structures. In business, we use 3 other specific organizational methods, and there are more than just these 3 in the previous 4 that I mentioned, but these 3 that we're about to talk about are the most common. So we're going to go into some more depth here on the ones that you'll most likely use in most professional situations. We call it the direct organizational method, the indirect organizational method, and lastly, the problem solution method. So let's kind of walk through these step by step, what they look like, with some examples and how you'll integrate this into your own workplace writing. So first of all, the direct method for writing. You'll see the direct method is this. It puts the most important information first. This is, again, is similar to the inverted pyramid style, but this is what we're going to use in pretty common short messages. It's direct, it's short and to the point. It's used for most routine communication like email, just quick conversations. It's necessary in times also of danger or extreme need. So this is where you just have to get the message out quickly and fast for efficiency and for safety purposes. But most emails you send on a regular basis, most conversations you have with people are going to be written in these types of direct method organization structure. So when do you use it? Well, you have to make simple requests, when you ask straightforward questions to people, you give a matter-of-fact statement. When you notify people of anticipated or minimally impactful bad news, if it's going to be more significant bad news, you use the indirect method, which we'll get to in just a second. But if it's just kind of minimally impactful bad news, you'll use the direct method. Or if you need to announce imminent danger. All right, so 3 very quick steps when you write in the direct method. So you're just going to state the most important thing first. You have 3 options. You can either ask a question, give a statement, or make a request, or provide that safety information. You can provide any helpful details after that, and then lastly, you'll close your message. So that's the direct method for writing. Let's look at some examples of what this looks like. The direct method example number 1, this is a simple request. When you're asking for something that will require minimal effort from the recipient, you use the direct method for writing. So you can see here an example would look like this. Step one, you state the request, which is the most important thing first. In the email, you can see there, hey, hi, Jerry, can you please send me the revised schedule for the community tree planting project? That's the most important thing first. Step two, add clarifying details. I need to make sure the trees are ordered and delivered to the appropriate locations so that we don't risk any trees dying before planting. So that's the details. Step three, you just close. Thanks for your help, and you sign your name there, Kofi. Okay, so that's kind of the quick, direct method, simple request. Let's look at another example of when you would use the direct method. This would be a straightforward question. So when you're unsure about something that a recipient can help easily clarify. So if you just need some quick information from somebody, the direct method works really well again. So step one, you ask the question. Hi, Alex, do you know if I will need a visa when I travel to China this fall? Then step two, ask clarifying details. If so, can you please tell me the process for applying, what the cost is, and if the company will pay for it? Step three, close. Grateful for any insight you can provide, Javas. Okay, so you can see that it's a straightforward question where the response is going to be fairly simple that they can give back to you again, direct method. All right, let's look at direct method example number 3. This is a matter-of-fact statement. So when you're providing information that needs little explanation or little explanation to the recipient. So again, you can see here, step 1, just give that statement. Hi, Sophie, I looked into the invoice you asked me about, and it appears that it has already been processed. You see that quick statement there. Step 2, add clarifying details. I appreciate you notifying me about that. We would have paid it twice. And then step 3, close. All best, DeAndre. Okay, you can see again, fairly simple, straightforward, direct method of communication. Let's look at example 4.1. So we're going to look at 2 different ways of sharing anticipated and low impact bad news. So again, if it's high impact bad news, you'll use the indirect method. But if it's just kind of minimally impactful, or if it's anticipated, we stick with the direct method of communication. So in this example, it's when you're relaying bad news that the recipient expects or knows is likely. Okay, so let's look at an example here. In step 1, you state that bad news right up front. So, hi Tyrone, we regret to inform you that your submission was not selected as this year's winner for the Golden Bear Award. Okay, so that's the bad news right up front. This is the case where Tyrone probably submitted for an award. He knows that many people have submitted. It's not likely that he won, although he's hoping, and it still is bad news. It's anticipated, and it's not a big surprise, or it's not going to necessarily be incredibly overwhelming or damaging or make him really maybe sad. It's kind of expected. Okay, so step 2, you add clarifying details. This year we had the largest number of submissions that we have ever had, making our decision incredibly difficult. We appreciate you taking the time to submit your work and look forward to seeing another of your submissions in the future. And then again, step 3, you close. Sincerely, Abby, Chair, Golden Bear Selection Committee. So again, fairly direct, fairly short. You put the bad news first, add clarifying details, and then close. Let's look at another way that this would work in bad news. This is low impact bad news, meaning it doesn't have a significant effect on their personal or professional life. They're not going to be overly disappointed or sad about it, or they're not going to be upset or mad about the news, just mildly disappointed. So this is when you're relaying bad news that isn't all that serious or impactful on the recipient. So another quick example, direct method here. Step 1, state the bad news first. So, hi everyone, I'm sad to say it, but we are going to have to cancel the planned company barbecue this month. Okay, you see step 2, the clarifying details. Several have indicated that the timing doesn't work well with their personal travel plans, and others have noted their client meetings and project deadlines are happening that same week. It's a hectic time. We'll reconvene and aim for a fun event next month. Sincerely, Amar. So you can see that this, again, is bad news, disappointing news, but it's not overly dramatic. So again, you can just stick with that direct method. Okay, and last example here, direct method example number 5. This is announcing imminent danger. So when there is danger, time is of the essence, or safety is concerned, again, you want to stick with that direct method, because it just gives them exactly what they need. It's very efficient. It keeps them safe, and they don't have to spend extra time that is unnecessary. So again, step one, state the bad news. First of all, urgent, there is a tornado reported near our campus. Seek shelter immediately. Step two, add clarifying details. Remember the safety procedures for tornadoes. Go to the lowest floor in your building. Stay in an inside room without windows. Get under a sturdy table or bench if possible, and then cover yourself with a blanket or cushion to protect from debris. And then remain in place until announcement says tornado danger is gone. Okay, and then step three, you'll see you just close emergency management team. And you'll notice in all of these examples of the direct method that they're all fairly straightforward and to the point. We're not spending a lot of time giving unnecessary information, and most communication is going to be better that way. You give people exactly what they need, no more, no less. We want to be efficient, we want to be direct, and give them what they need. However, there are times when you move into what's called the indirect method for writing. And this is typically when you're relaying bad news and you have to kind of set people up for the information they're about to get. This is the case when an organization, someone might be upset or angry or not understand why they're getting this bad news. And you need a little bit more detail and explanation before you just lay out the bad news on them. It can feel kind of insensitive and hurtful and non-empathetic sometimes if it's a really serious issue and you just dump the bad news on them very quickly. It can also damage relationships with clients and other partnerships that you have in your business. So indirect method can be very effective when you have to give more kind of serious or negative information that people need kind of an explanation for. So you'll see here the indirect method, it prepares a reader for bad news. It establishes trust in you and in your organization. It provides logical reasons that your recipient of your message can at least understand, even though they'll still be disappointed they understand your reasoning behind it. It shows empathy and support for the person you're giving the message to. It can reduce tension or animosity. So if your message is going to make people upset, it can at least reduce some of that tension and anger. It can also offer an alternative direction. Sometimes bad news can come with new possibilities and opportunities, and this is a chance to be able to present that effectively to the person you're sending the message to. Okay, so when would you use the direct method? Well, if you don't know the recipient well or at all, sometimes that might encourage the need for this. When the bad news is not expected, if they're expecting a positive news and you're about to tell them something totally different, they might the indirect method would likely work better. When bad news will significantly impact the recipient, or when bad news may cause a strong negative emotional reaction from the recipient, if they're going to get upset or angry. An indirect response a direct response can feel too abrupt, terse, or unempathetic. And if that's the case, then you move to the indirect method. Okay, steps for the indirect method. First of all, you're going to open with a buffer, something to kind of set the stage and get your recipient on board with you. We'll talk about that and look at some examples here in just a second. Then you're going to explain and justify your reasoning. And then third is when you actually state the bad news. And then fourth, you close with a pleasant closing to keep them in a positive mood as best you can. So this is kind of the steps for the indirect method. Let's walk through a particular situation. Okay, so you'll see the situation here. A microwave manufacturing company has been doing demonstrations in your company's retail stores for years, and they see a significant boost in revenue every year when they do it. They are having an anniversary sale and are excited to come do demonstrations in your company's stores once again, making the request to do so. They fully expect you to say yes, and they're looking forward to this. However, your company is making some policy changes and cannot allow them to do the demonstrations. You know that the news will be very disappointing to your client and it may impact their sales dramatically. Furthermore, you don't want to damage the relationship that you have with this client because you like to sell their microwaves in your stores and you want to continue doing so. So it's a good partnership you have and a good relationship and you don't want to damage that. Okay, so you need to set this up in kind of an indirect method. So step one, you open with that buffer. Okay, so according to business communications expert Scott Ober, he mentions a buffer should be these 5 things. First of all, it should be neutral. It's not a negative opening, but not necessarily implying positive either. You don't want to lead people to believe you're going to give them positive news only for them to find out that it's negative. That has kind of a conflicting emotional reaction, and people tend to resist that. So make sure it's neutral. Second, it should be relevant. Don't stray too far from the issue itself or sound like you're avoiding it. So you still want to get to the point and make it relevant to your consumers, or in this case, your client's request. It should be supportive, so you're aiming to build trust. So the buffer does kind of put you on common ground. You're not there to lecture, or instruct your reader. It should be interesting enough that it draws the reader into the rest of the message. So don't make sure that they do read the entire thing, but then just also make it short. So don't drag it out either. So these are kind of the 5 key components to a buffer. So there are a lot of different ways you can add buffers at the beginning of an indirect method approach. These are just some examples. You'll see here, first of all, agreement. We both recognize the promotional possibilities that accompanying big anniversary sales such as yours can have. Or maybe appreciation. Thanks for letting us know of your success in selling golden microwaves. Or maybe a compliment. Congratulations on having served the community of Greenville for 10 years. Or maybe just some facts. 3/4 of the golden microwaves distributors who held anniversary sales last year were reported at least a 6% increase in annual sales of our home products. Or just in general principles, we believe in furnishing golden microwaves distributors a wide range of support in promoting our products. Good news. Golden microwaves upcoming 20% off sale will be heavily advertised and will certainly provide increased traffic for your February anniversary sale, or maybe some kind of an understanding. I wish to assure you of Golden Microwave's desire to make your anniversary sale successful. So you can see the different ways that you set that up, and you don't need to use all of them, certainly. Sometimes you can use 1 or 2 of these, but again, keep it short. Come up with a particular method or buffer to really kind of set the stage. The second thing then is to explain and justify. You have to give that reason why so that you can prepare them for your bad news. They understand your reasoning before you give them the bad news. So recipients need to know how you arrived at your conclusion. So to do this, you're going to transition from your buffer, provide some logical facts, results, and processes. Give as much information as necessary, but don't give more information than is necessary. Only let them know the reasons that led directly to this decision. Explain the benefits of the decision to them specifically, and also maybe to the company, depending on your particular scenario. And then describe it as a business decision, not something to be taken personally. So don't point to an individual or to their company, but rather say, this is a decision we had to make for the best interest of your business and ours. And this is why we're doing this. But again, stick to the facts. So here's an example. A survey of our dealers indicated that they felt the space taken up by in-store demonstrations and the resulting traffic issues were highly problematic. They were also concerned about the legal liability of having something cooking in their stores. So you can see that's the explanation here. And it should be an explanation that your recipient can get on board with and can understand. All right. Then in step 3, you're going to actually state the bad news. So you've given your buffer, you've given some reasons, and now you're going to state the bad news. If the buffer and the justification are set up properly, the bad news will become expected. The recipient will be prepared and the news will seem logical. Even if it's disappointing, they'll understand your reasoning. Still, the language that you give matters, so avoid negative words. Avoid things like cannot, or we're not able to, or it is impossible, or unfortunately, sorry, we must refuse. Sometimes those negative words leave a lasting damper or a negative effect on the message. You can just stick to the facts, state the bad news, and it doesn't seem as negative. It has a more positive feeling to it. So you can see here what to do. Place it in the middle of the paragraph. The bad news itself should kind of be positioned within another sentence or two. Surround the bad news with additional reasons, which helps to, again, bolster the reasons why the bad news is happening and to buffer it a little bit. Avoid the you and your language. So don't say you are doing this or your company does this, because that can sound like you are attacking them or blaming them. And then avoid apologizing. As a company, as an organization, as an individual, if you have good logical reasons, that should be enough. You shouldn't say, we're sorry, or we apologize for not being able to. Rather, again, keep it positive and avoid kind of that negative lasting impression. Okay, so something like this. In response to these dealer concerns, we eliminated in-store demonstrations and now advertise exclusively in print and online. Doing so has enabled us to begin featuring products through a much wider range of media, reaching more people. So you can see it's kind of positioned around this positive note. So we eliminated in-store demonstrations and now advertise exclusively. Doing so has enabled us to begin featuring products. So you eliminated, that's the bad news, but then you see how that's kind of positioned in a more positive light, okay? The whole point of this is not to be misleading, but rather to really help them understand the reasoning behind the decision and to help them feel more confident in why you did this and to maintain that relationship and to not get them, and to hope that they won't get more upset or disappointed. Lastly, you're just going to close pleasantly. So remember that bad news is still bad news. Your recipient will likely still be disappointed. It doesn't change that fact. But closing pleasantly does help maintain a good relationship. So again, some things to avoid. Apologizing. A lot of apologies can really lay that problem on your own company or your own self, and really maybe that isn't necessary. Avoid anticipating problems, saying things like, if you run into any problems, please, that suggests that there are possibilities of problems if you just kind of leave that language out. Inviting needless communication. If you have any further questions, sometimes that just encourages more conversation. If you can't change the policy anyway, just kind of leave it with a positive note and don't request further communication if it's not necessary. Referring again to bad news. Although we were unable to allow, so just keep, laying on the bad news over and over again can sometimes be problematic as well. Or repeating a cliche. If we can be of any further help, that language feels less authentic. And then also revealing doubt. I trust that you now understand, suggesting that they might not fully understand the situation, which kind of is a little bit condescending. So again, you can see there's a lot of things you want to avoid. Writing these messages isn't necessarily easy as you think through all these different elements, but ultimately you can come up with a few different possibilities. Again, keeping it short, succinct, and to the point. So you can try something like giving best wishes. Best wishes for success with your 10th anniversary sale. We have certainly enjoyed our relationship with Parker Brothers and look forward to continuing to serve your needs in the future. Or you could try this, a counter proposal, if this is possible. To provide increased publicity for your 10th anniversary sale, we would be happy to include a banner ad on our website that will promote your sale. So you're essentially saying, we can't do this, but we can do this for you. Or this third thing, maybe try other sources of help. A dealer in South Carolina switched from using in-store demonstrations to showing a video continuously during his microwave sale, and it worked really well. So maybe if you have some other insights or possibilities for them. Now, again, every scenario is very different, but the organizational structure essentially follows this particular approach. So I want to show you just what this would look like in a full example, something like this. Thanks for letting us know of your success in selling Golden Microwaves. Golden Microwaves' upcoming 20% off sale will be heavily advertised and will certainly provide increased traffic for your February anniversary sale. So again, that's the buffer, the setup. Second is the explanation. A survey of our dealers indicated that they felt the space taken up by in-store demonstrations and the resulting traffic issues were highly problematic. They were also concerned about the legal liability of having something cooking in their stores. So that's the reasoning. Third, here's the bad news. In response to those dealer concerns, we eliminated in-store demonstrations and now advertise exclusively in print and online. Doing so has enabled us to begin featuring products through a much wider range of media, reaching more people. Okay, so that's the buffer, or excuse me, the bad news positioned within an additional reason and buffer there. And then fourth, the conclude positively. To provide increased publicity for your 10th anniversary sale, we'd be happy to include a banner ad on our website that will promote your sale. We have certainly enjoyed our relationship with Parker Brothers and look forward to continuing to serve your needs in the future. You can see that full example there. Now, I want to show you just a very different example to give you a little bit more depth here on the indirect method. It's a completely different scenario, but same indirect approach. So here's a new and different situation. A growing company that manufactures treadmills has been relying on many departments to separately coordinate with each other the completion of many components of each product, including the engineering, technical writing, marketing, sales, quality control, and legal components of each new treadmill project. As may be imagined, the communication between these departments has been difficult, and the need to hire an internal project manager has been obvious and well supported by many in the company for quite some time. The executive team recently announced the good news that the company would be able to hire for this position, and they'd be selecting a small team to interview and hire the new person. Within the company, however, many team leaders, supervisors, and middle management all have strong opinions about what skills and background the new hire should have. There's also a history of disagreement between departments and some difficult personality conflicts. Because of this, everyone wants to be on the hiring committee, but the assistant vice president, who oversees all major hiring, knows this is just not feasible. Once the committee is selected, the assistant vice president sends this email out, knowing that it will be received as bad news to those who are not chosen to be a part of the committee, and has the potential to create significant conflict and disagreement with the decision. Therefore, we need a indirect approach to set up some reasoning so that those who are not selected to be on the hiring committee can feel better about the decision. Okay, so you can see here the message that goes out in this indirect method here. Step one, this is where you open with the buffer, appreciation, and good news. Okay, so hi everyone, thanks for your patience as I've worked with the executive team and Vice President Kim Towson to determine who will be on our search committee for hiring the new project manager. The job ad is now posted, and Kim has also named the hiring committee, which means we can finally move forward. So you can see here the buffer, appreciation to the team, and then the good news. Okay, that's the buffer. Step two is where we transition and provide logical facts or reasoning for the decision that's about to come up. So we recognize that many of you have wanted to participate in the hiring of this new position. If the executive team had allowed everyone on the committee, it would have been obviously too large to function effectively. In part, scheduling meetings and interviews alone would have been too difficult. What the executive team suggested is that we pare down the committee to just those who will be in the most direct and frequent contact with the project manager on a daily basis, which would be the managers from the engineering, technical writing, and marketing departments, a legal team rep, and 2 members of the executive team. Okay, so that is the transition and logical facts. Again, trying to get people to understand the reasoning. Even though they're still going to be disappointed, the reasoning is clear and obvious. Then step 3, you state the bad news. Positive framing, positioned near more reasonings. Again, so this is where the bad news comes out. With that in mind, Kim named Jim and me as the 2 executive committee members, along with Jennifer Barnes from engineering, Cheryl Braithwaite from technical writing, and Brandon Egan from marketing. This 5-person team will be able to provide well-rounded perspective and work efficiently. And you'll see in there you have the bad news, which is stating the people, but again, you're not leaning or duplicating or repeating the bad news over and over again. And then you're also buffering it with that well-rounded perspective and work efficiently is that kind of positive buffering again and positioning the bad news within more reasons. Okay, and then step 4, you just close pleasantly with a positive statement. It's exciting to be able to move forward. We look forward to bringing on a new talented individual to our team. All right, and then thanks, Richard. All right, okay, so you can see how that indirect method works with a couple of different examples there. All right, well, let's move to our last organizational structure that we call the problem solution method for writing. This is usually used when you're pitching an idea or you're trying to get someone on board or to maybe provide funding for something. This is where you're trying to persuade somebody to do something. You're presenting a problem and you have a solution to fix that and you want to pitch that idea. So the problem solution method establishes a problem or an opportunity. There's something that we can take advantage of. Uses evidence to make a claim about the exigence, which is the extent of the problem and the possible solutions. The exigence is kind of the urgency or the need for doing this. It describes a possible solution and leaves recipients with a new approach or ideas to consider. So when to use the problem solution method? Well, there's a problem that is recognized or a solution is needed, and a solution is needed, or an opportunity is available and needs to be seized, or there are clients, stakeholders, or decision makers are exploring new avenues, okay? So steps for the problem solution method follow a 4-step process. First of all, you identify the problem or opportunity. Second, you describe the analysis or research. Then you detail your solution, and then you open it up for questions at the end. So it's a fairly straightforward, identify the problem, describe your analysis or research, then detail the solution, and then open that up for questions. Okay, so you can see here, step 1, state the problem or opportunity, state the purposes. What is the problem or the opportunity? State the exigence, to what extent should this problem or opportunity be addressed, and then state the stakeholders. Who and how will they benefit from solving the problem or seizing that opportunity? So you kind of start there in step 1. Again, this is all organizational structure. That's why we go step by step. So then step 2, you're going to explain your research. Conduct that research, study and analyze the problem through applicable research, then describe your methods and findings. Explain how you learned and what you found. And then you're going to propose a solution. Use your findings to provide reasonings for that solution. And then you'll detail your implementation. Okay, and then in step 3, you propose the solution. So lean on your research, connect the dots between the solution and the research, explain how your solution works. So you give the details about the process, timeline, budget, tasks, and so forth. And then describe the benefits of the solution, clarify why that solution works. And then lastly, identify counter arguments and limitations. So if you know that your audience is going to resist your proposal or have issues or concerns about what you're proposing, know what those stakeholders and decision makers may ask, and be able to position your solution within those arguments and be able to address those. And then lastly, conclude with action. So you're going to summarize your key points. How will you be implementing this solution, or how implementing the solution will solve the problem or opportunity? And then state the action plan. Explain exactly what needs to happen next, and then make yourself available. Allow recipients to the opportunity to follow up or ask further questions. And so that's kind of the 4-step process for the problem solution method. Okay, so we've gone through 3 of the more common methods for organizational structure in business and professional communication. I want to go back to where we started in this particular segment, where I mentioned the organizational structure has a rhetorical effect. Just be conscious of the way that you're organizing your message, because it does affect the way people interpret and respond to it. It builds credibility, it establishes empathy, it helps provide reasonings. Direct methods differ than the indirect method, and the problem solution method is also kind of a third and different method. You might use more than just those 3, but certainly be conscious of whatever you're doing in that organizational structure and the effect it has on your audience. I want to leave this segment with this thought from James Kilpatrick, author of The Writer's Art. He says, quote, "The crafts of writing and carpentry are deceptively simple. The carpenter has to begin with a plan. The writer must begin with a thought. There must be at least the germ of an idea. Before the first board is nailed to the second board, or the first word connected to the second word, there has to be some clear notion of where we expect to be when we have finished nailing or writing." The idea is that there's always got to be a plan in place. You have to kind of see the final vision of your message as you're constructing it, so that you know that you're taking your audience on the appropriate journey, and you're creating that thing, that message that you really are hoping to send out in a way that's going to impact your audience the way that you hope they'll understand it. All right, so now that's it on organization. We're going to move next into module 3.3, formatting documents. All right, in module 3.3, we're going to talk about formatting documents, kind of the visual layout and structure of your document and how that impacts the way people read and engage with your messages. All right, so information design does more than just make documents look pretty. Appropriately formatted documents improves attention, engagement, comprehension, and memorability. Information design is a term we use to structure visually a document in terms of how we move text around, how we add spacing, if we integrate graphics or lists or things like that. But it is a lot more important than just making things look nice. It actually impacts the way people in practice read, engage with, understand, and remember our information. So we want to make sure we are strategically and thoughtfully designing our documents. You'll see this great thought here from Steve Krug. He's a usability expert, author of the book Don't Make Me Think, but he says that we don't read pages, we scan that. Now, he's talking about websites specifically, but there's a significant amount of research that suggests this is the case for nearly any type of document with a lot of text or information. While some documents certainly will be read in full, word for word, typically we should expect that our readers will naturally satisfice. And satisfice is a term that means both satisfy and suffice. In other words, people will read enough until they are satisfied that they have what they need and that they feel like they have a sufficient amount of information. That means that they're going to skim and they're going to scan. They're going to look for headings, subheadings, graphics, data visualizations, callouts, and things like that. They will find what is relevant to them. And you can probably relate to that if you've ever opened up a user's manual. Unlikely you read the entire thing, you only read what was relevant to you in that moment. If you got a 70-page report, you likely skip to the sections that mattered to you. We're looking for things that are directly relevant to us in that moment. So again, while some people will read entire documents word for word, we need to expect that many will not. And even if they are going to read it word for word, it encourages them to read more of it if it's well designed and formatted in a way that is helpful to them. So again, it's always about helping our audiences. Okay, so there's a few different ways that we can look at formatting and structure. So formatting and scanning, format with scanning in mind, layouts and structure. So ask yourself, first of all, can I do anything to make the information easier to find, read, follow, understand, and remember? And if you look at this graphic here, that text is not going to encourage reading. It's just a bunch of words on a screen. There's no formatting that's been done with the exception of there is some margins and there is an indent. But other than that, there's no formatting. And that will kind of discourage people from reading the information. So ask yourself, is there anything I can do with this text to make it a little bit more scannable, a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier to follow? These are just a few minor things you can do. You can see from that one there on the left, the one on the right, we've added a heading, a bolded list, also shortened the line length by increasing the margin sign and putting in marginal comments to draw attention to those really key and important messages. So a couple of things there alone have made this a much more readable and engaging document. And even though it's the same amount of text, people are much more likely to read the document there on the right than they are the one on the left. Now, you can go even a step further and maybe create summarized visuals of the document, maybe even more list items, briefer paragraphs, some visuals and some icons. And now, granted, sometimes there is more depth that you have to add for your audiences to know, but maybe you can create a summary document of a report so that people can feel more comfortable getting through just the information that they need in a short amount of time. So again, be thinking about ways to make it easier to read, follow, and understand, and remember the content. Okay, so format with scanning in mind, the bite snack meal approach. This is a commonly used metaphor for thinking about the way we structure our documents in terms of give them the most important, biggest thing first, the bite. See if that's if that's going to lure them into the document. If they don't see enough that grabs their attention, they'll leave. If you give them a good bite and they like it, then they'll move into a snack. They'll eat a little bit more. They'll consume a little bit more of that message. And then, of course, if they really care, if it really matters, and they're really pulled in, then they get the details. But to do that, you can structure your documents in a few different ways. You'll see that the bite grabs the attention. The snack gives important information after their attention's been grabbed. And then the meal gives the details and further explanation. Sometimes we call this also the ABC level messaging, where you give them the A thing first, the B second, and the C third. So you'll see like headings, subheadings, and subheadings in kind of that layered model where it's big, middle, and small. This is an example of a flyer. I like to use the flyer first to just kind of think about big topic, grab attention. You'll see there, that's the bite, the heading, the big headline for the flyer, you'd call that the bite. The snack then is going to give a little bit more information they might need to know that's related to the flyer. And then the meal is those specific details. It's maybe the company name, the address, location, maybe timing if it's for an event or something like that. But that same principle can be applied to a report as well, where the heading becomes like the H1, the big heading, the number one, where you have kind of a summary at the top. If that gives them enough, then they'll move into that second, the B level or the bite. or excuse me, or the snack, where we have maybe a little bit more information. You add some visuals and some graphics that help pull that in. And then the subheading, I mean, it's a smaller third level, C-level heading that then gives more detailed information. But again, be thinking about how your audience will engage with this. How can you help them skim, scan, and satisfy us using that bite snack meal approach? Okay, so format with readability, margins and spacing, a few things that you can do to improve readability. So again, the original there on the left has not been formatted for readability, but if we can do a few things, I'm going to walk you through kind of a 6-step process for improving the document. First of all, step 1, add some space between the paragraphs. You'll see just a little bit more white space makes it more readable. It's a small tweak, but just that extra space helps there. And then remove unnecessary indents. Indents are kind of an old writing method that was used years ago, but it's not really good for business communication. It adds extra negative space, which creates more visual noise, actually. So if you can just get rid of those indents, keep those spaces there, you can see there's just a space between paragraphs. And this is the way most websites are designed now, where we automatically create an extra space there. Step 3 is to use contrasting fonts or font weights for headings and body text. So you have your heading and then the text there. And so you can see a visible difference in the way that that text is standing out. So, you know, I created this slide so that you couldn't read the text intentionally, so you can just focus on the visual layout there. But you can see there how in step 3, we have the contrasting fonts and font weights between the body text and the heading text, so it stands out more. And then in step 4, shorten the line length. We can read a little bit better if text is smaller. That's why most novels and books that we buy are on a smaller sheet of paper than what we normally type on. It's because it reads better, we read faster. So if you can increase the margins, that decreases that line length and people are more likely to read it. And then lastly, you can add some space between the lines, and you'll see that just spacing the text out a little bit more. Even though that last step 5 document is going to be probably require more pieces of paper, interestingly enough, research has shown that people are more likely to read it just because it's been formatted in a way with margins and spacing that is helpful. Okay, so let's format it with readability in mind with some lists. Okay, so if you can add lists into your document, that can really help audiences. So lists draw attention to key points and facts. They make skimming and scanning much easier, especially if you're working with numbers or data or steps in a process. If you can pull those out of paragraphs, so much easier to read. Also clarify and simplify steps in a process, and then adding that white space, which encourages more reading. So you'll see here the before, where we have a paragraph of text, which seems kind of dense, and it's a little bit hard to follow. If you just format with a list, that one change alone can dramatically improve the readability of a document. The document there on the right actually even removes a little bit of extra text, as well as a few words that have been removed, because it fits more succinctly into a bolded list. And you can see there how much simpler that is to read just by adding a list into that paragraph. All right, well, let's look at some more things with lists. Okay, so lists improve readability when they do a few things. So first of all, they include an introductory or a lead-in sentence. You want to have something that introduces a list. Second, you want to have the list indented from the lead-in sentence above it. So lists should be set apart in terms of the margin and spacing from the paragraph above it. And then also, they are left justified. You don't want to center align a list. You want to make sure it's left justified. So you can see this is a good example here where it's left justified. It's in a chronological order, and the text, the list is indented from the paragraph above it. So you can see to present a foreign student's completed form, do step 1, enter the student's admission, 2, endorse all copies, 3, return a copy, 4, send a copy. So that's kind of that the chronological list there. Lists should also be in parallel format. So parallel format means that all list items should start in the same way in both verb tense or word type. So you can see the before bad example, reduce the risk of issues with a client by asking them to sign the creative brief, update them if schedule gets postponed, constant communication. you might notice as you read that it sounds a little clunky. And the reason for that is the first word after each bulleted item starts in uh, a different conjugation of the verb. It's a different grammatical structure there. So we have asking, update, and then constant communication is actually a noun phrase. So we have a gerund form of the verb in the first bullet, then we have a present tense verb in update, and then we have a noun phrase. So that sounds really clunky when someone's reading it. It's a lot harder for people to remember items in a list if it doesn't follow parallel format. So you can fix that by setting those up all the same way. So you can see here, to reduce the risk of client issues, ask them to sign the creative brief, update them if schedule gets postponed, and stay in constant communication. What you can see here is the lead-in sentence has been adjusted to make sure that the 3 bullets all match and can complete that sentence. Ask is a present tense verb, update is a present tense verb, and stay is a present tense verb. So they all start the same. So that's going to be a better use of your list in that parallel format. Okay, so formatting conventions in mind with some style guides. Most businesses have an established style guide. If your company does, you want to make sure you're following it. If they don't, you might want to recommend that to your company. But style guides make document formatting easier for you. Usually they'll already have professional graphic and information designers who set up style guides with appropriate margins and fonts and colors and heading sizes, and all that's already kind of pre-set up. So following a style guide will make document formatting easier for you. So first of all, just follow that guide. They tend to makes your documents look more professional. It standardizes expectations for employees and customers alike, and improves brand recognition. So something like this is what a style guide would look like, where they have logo usage, typography uses, logo variation, brand colors, but a lot of times they'll also have things like margins and spacing. They'll have letterhead formats. So each company and organization does these a little bit differently, but you will want to follow the style guide. That will make your life easier, and it's better for your company and your business if you can follow that formatting conventions. Okay, and then formatting with conventions in mind, letters. Okay, business letter format is one of the most commonly established formats in business communication. So I just kind of wanted to draw your attention to this. If you can follow well-established conventions in business communication, whatever that document type might be, it can really help people follow the information. They can understand it better. It looks more professional. They recognize the purpose of the document a little bit quicker. So you'll see in business letter format, you typically have your company's logo. You'll have the date somewhere on the document. They do tend to look a little bit differently depending on the way your company has designed their letterhead. But you'll also have an inside address, which is the recipient's name and address. Usually you'll have their salutation. The salutation typically includes a salutation word like dear or hello, the title of the person if they have a particular title like president or doctor or reverend or something like that. You'll use their name. If you know them well, you usually use their first name, and if you don't know them well, you use their last name. Also, a comma or a colon after that that kind of sets up the salutation there before the letter. And then you're going to have the body text, and you'll notice this follows that formatting we mentioned earlier that does not have indents, and there's a space between each paragraph. That's a little bit more professional. Then you have your closing, usually words like sincerely or respectfully. Then you have your signature, both print and signed, so that you can have that personal touch to it. And then also the contact or company info from which you're sending it. It usually includes things like your address, email, phone, and website. So this is kind of common formatting best practice. And again, every company's is a little bit different, but if you can follow standard formatting best practices, it's going to improve the readability and memorability of your document. And last, I'm just going to kind of show reports. Again, there are a lot of different formats for a lot of different purposes, but business letters and reports are two of the most common. Report formats do vary by industry, company, and purpose, but they typically include what's called front matter, body sections, and back matter, and they should be designed professionally. So You think here, front matter, typically if you're writing a report, it includes these things, not necessarily always all of them, but often. So this is for a more formalized report that's going to be, a full-length written document. You'll typically have a cover, title page, letter of transmittal, table of contents, list of tables and figures, executive summary, and an introduction. That's all what we call front matter that shows up at the very beginning of a document. And they typically go in that order, that very order right there. Next, you're going to have the body. This will vary depending on the type of report you're writing, but typically you'll have something like a research method, findings, analysis and discussion, conclusions, and recommendations. It all falls within the body or the bulk of the report. And then at the end, we have what's called back matter. And in the back matter, you have your references or citations. You'll have appendices. That usually includes attachments, like maybe you have some photos or some survey results or research or other things that are attached, some legal documents and other things. The glossary would be like terms that you need to define, and then maybe an index, although indexes usually only show up in really lengthy reports that are almost book length. Okay, but that's typically what you're going to include in a report. And following those standard conventions really do help people follow and navigate documents. And then you can use your ABC level structure within each section. That can work really well to keep your documents nice and professional. You'll see here, this is an example of an audit report for a state legislature, but this includes those types of documents where you have the cover and a title page and a letter of transmittal, and then there's a brief summary at the beginning, like an executive summary, table of contents, and you can see how they move through chapter sections, bodies of the report, and on and on. But when you format them and strategically think about the organizational structure and formatting, it can really, really help your audience to engage with the information that you're sending to them. All right, well, that's it on formatting. In our next section now, we're going to move into using plain language in 3.4. Okay, in module 3.4, we're going to jump into using plain language. This is the fun one where we get to really look at the specifics of words, sentence structures, nouns, and verbs, and how those choices can impact the way people interpret messages. All right, so let's start with this thought here in this section. Using plain language will make you a better writer. Sounds fantastic, right? It will also make you more credible, persuasive, and influential. Okay, sounds amazing. So what is plain language? Well, plain language, according to the Plain Writing Act of 2010, according to the United States government, is, quote, writing that is clear, concise, well organized, and follows other best practices appropriate to the subject or field and intended audience. Okay, that sounds a little vague there, but it's this idea of being clear and concise. A more specific definition comes from Professor Robert Eagleson. This was quoted on plainlanguage.gov. He says this: plain language is clear, straightforward expression using only as many words as are necessary. It is language that avoids obscurity, inflated vocabulary, and convoluted sentence structure or construction. It is not baby talk, nor is it a simplified version of the English language. Writers of plain English let their audience concentrate on the message instead of being distracted by complicated language. They make sure that their audience understands the message easily. And that's the key there. We are using language that our audience will understand, and we're reducing unnecessary words and unnecessary complexity. So 3 guiding principles of plain language. First of all, we write for our audience, meaning that there are various audiences have different needs, different levels of vocabulary, or different levels of simplicity. We don't dumb down the language. That's not what using plain language means. Rather, it means using language that our audience will understand. So we want to take their knowledge and experience into account. So if they are PhDs that use a very certain type of sophisticated, language and terminology, great, you can use that for them. If they are, don't have as much experience in reading, maybe a lower education level, or if they just work in a different field or area, then you adapt your language to them. Regardless, what we're doing is we're writing for our audience and for their needs. Second, we're going to focus on what they need and want to know. So we need to make our content applicable to them. We need to learn what they need so that we can answer their questions. We should be putting ourselves in their shoes, and we need to tell the reader why the information matters. They should be able to understand that. Okay, and then the third guiding principle is that we guide them through the information. We need to determine how much they already know, and then we explain to them what they need to know. We ensure all their questions are answered, and then we need to ask, is the best outcome for my audience achieved by what I wrote? So we kind of guide ourselves through this process in order to make sure that they are guided through that same process. But these are the three primary guiding principles of using plain language. Okay, so plain language helps readers accomplish three primary things. First, find what they need through organization, format, and structure, which we just covered in the previous two segments. But then it also helps them understand what they find, and then third, use what they understand. Okay, and that's what we're going to get into these next two sections here in this segment right now in 3.4. So we're talking about the specific words, tone, sentences, grammar, and then making it relevant, timeliness, or it's timely and useful to our audiences. Okay, so that's what plain language is, and this is what it accomplishes. All right, so we're going to go through, I'm going to walk you through several specific examples. I encourage you to maybe pause as we go through each of these examples because they're a little bit detailed, and you might want to kind of think through the differences in language and sentence structure and word choice. So the video will move somewhat rapidly, but if you are able to pause and think about these, I think you'll get a little bit more out of it. Okay, so we're going to walk through several different plain language principles. And the first one is writing conversationally. So what does that mean? It means people prefer to read writing that sounds like a conversation. You write directly to people as if you're talking to them face to face. So what does that look like? Well, using present tense and direct address. So we talk in present tense voice. Direct address means we're speaking directly to them using the you or the implied you form. Okay, so you'll see here on the left, this is kind of a hard to follow statement in the pink. It says applicants who were federal employees at the time that the injury was sustained should have filed a compensation request at that time. Failure to do so could have an effect on the degree to which the applicant can be covered under this part. Okay, that's a little bit difficult to understand. You'll see that just changing it to present tense and direct address and removing some words, so much easier to understand. So here's the good example. You may not be covered under this part if you were a federal employee at the time of the injury and you did not file a claim at that time. So same message, much simpler to read and understand. So that would be a good example of conversationally to meet plain language standards. Okay, also using contractions. We don't want to overwhelm our reading with contractions. It can sometimes sound a little bit too colloquial or informal, but using contractions does sound more like a conversation. So you'll see here on the avoid side, no pilot in command of a civil aircraft may allow any object to be dropped from that aircraft in flight that creates a hazard to persons or property. Whereas on the right, if you are a pilot in command of an aircraft, don't allow any object that creates a hazard to persons or property to be dropped from aircraft during the flight. So you can see here that don't makes it a little bit simpler to read. You could possibly even say you or instead of you are there, but adding a contraction here or there sounds more like you're speaking to a person face to face. Okay, so plain language principle first, write conversationally. Let's get into a second one. Plain language principle using examples. So complex topics are almost always better understood when they're supplemented with an example that the reader can apply to a similar situation or to something that's relevant to them in their personal lives. So try to find ways to use examples in your writing, especially if it's a complex subject. So you'll see here this example from the Environmental Protection Agency. The ozone standard states that the expected number of exceedances per year must be less than or equal to 1. The statistical term expected number is basically an arithmetic average. Okay, you can see that's kind of a complex topic. Now, this is obviously written for people that work in technical fields, so that's okay. but still going to be easier to understand if we provide an example. So you can see how the EPA follows this up with saying this. The following example explains what it would mean for an area to be in compliance with this type of standard. Suppose a monitoring station records a valid daily maximum hourly average ozone value for every day of the year during the past 3 years. At the end of each year, the number of days within maximum hourly concentrations above 0.12 ppm is determined, and this number is averaged with the results of previous years. As long as this average remains less than or equal to 1, the area is in compliance. Okay, so that description can really help people walk through their particular scenario. So giving examples is another use of plain language principle we want to follow. All right, so here's another plain language principle. You have likely heard of this, but we call this the active voice. Make the subject of your sentences perform the action rather than the verb acting upon the subject. So you'll see as we kind of walk through this, if that sounds a little bit confusing, on the avoid side, the report was written by Jamal. You'll see that the verb in that sentence was written, but that makes the subject is being acted upon rather than acting. Whereas if we switch that to Jamal wrote the report, Jamal now is the subject and is acting upon the report itself. So you're flipping that tense in order to make it clearer to understand. The second example there, the slide decks must have been designed by Pina. You can see if you flip that, Pina must have designed the slide decks. A little bit easier to understand there. Our tax dollars were wasted by the government. On the right side, the government wasted our tax dollars. Even though each of these makes sense and we can understand and follow them, the one on the right is clearer and more direct. We know who is using the verb there, who's making the action. In that next one, Deneva was given high praise by the committee. In the right side, the committee gave high praise to Deneva. You'll see there what we're really trying to do is add that subject directly next to the verb. That last one, the impact of sleep on happiness at work has been shown by research. The one there on the right, research shows that happiness at work is impacted by sleep. So active voice tends to be a little bit easier to follow, easier to read. It also reduces a significant amount of words. You can see there that on the right, we have fewer words in every single one of those sentences than we did on the left. So use that active voice as much as you possibly can. Okay, another plain language principle. Use simple words and phrases. So choose words and phrases that are short and simple over obscure or complex. Look for ways to reduce prepositions. So you can see here the words to avoid there on the left. You can change words like accomplish to do. It's just a simpler word. They're both understandable, but try for go for the simpler word when you can. Rather than accrue, you can say gain. Addressee, you can say you are the addressee. A number of some. You'll notice at the bottom of that list there on the left, due to the fact that. That's what we often see, and it's a problematic phrase. It just adds a lot of extra words. We can just say because. And you'll see a few of these other ones. Again, this is where you might want to pause and kind of study some of these phrases. But during the period, you can just say during. For a period of, you can just say for. In the amount of, you can say for. Instead of saying something like provided that, you can say if. So if you can reduce the number of words, and if you start seeing a lot of prepositions, words like to, for, to, for, about, of, those tend to be, or with, those are extra terms that we don't necessarily always need, and there might be a simpler way to write that statement and with fewer words. So just kind of look for that and find as simple of ways to say things that mean the exact same thing. Okay, plain language principle, removing hidden verbs. Okay, these are, hidden verb is a verb that is turned into a noun, which often requires more words to clarify. So to fix, you're going to, for nouns that end, look for nouns that end in terms like meant or tion, like shun, or ends, and see if a verb is used to describe it. If so, turn the noun into the verb. So I know that sounds a little bit confusing, so let's look at some examples here. So you can see here a void there on the left. Please fill out an application for a loan. Okay, that's a hidden verb because application, which is really the verb that we want, has been turned into a noun. Whereas on the right, we just say, please apply for a loan. That's a little bit easier. Rather than saying fill out an application, we can just say apply. Let's look at the next one. We need to start a collection of donations. Rather, you can just say we need to collect donations. You can see here you're usually adding extra words when we have started collection of. Rather, you can just say collect. On the third one, you will need to hold an investigation. You can just say you will need to investigate. On the fourth one, there is a disagreement among parties. Parties disagree. It is time to make a decision. It's time to decide. So you can see those terms. If you start seeing words that end in tion, ment, sion, you can't necessarily get rid of them all. But if it feels like your language is verbose or wordy or just kind of complicated, look and see if you have a lot of these hidden verbs showing up and see if you can change them into more direct verbs, get rid of those noun phrases. All right. Another plain language principle then is to avoid noun strings. Noun strings occur when you place 3 or more nouns in a row, confusing nouns and adjectives. It's hard for readers to read noun strings. So to fix, you want to reorder the string from right to left, change one of the nouns to a verb, and then add a preposition or article so that it makes sense. Again, let's look at some examples. So there on the left, avoid. Join the Customer Relationship Improvement Program. You'll notice we have 4 nouns right in a row. Customer Relationship Improvement Program. When you start adding many nouns back to back, it starts to get a little bit harder to follow and understand. So even though the one on the right does actually add a couple of words, it's a lot easier to understand. So this is the one example where you might have to add a couple of words, but join the program for improving customer relations. That's going to be a little bit easier to understand. You'll see here also on the bottom left there, AGB is creating a student house safety improvement health report. Again, well, that's 6 nouns in a row. Student house safety improvement health report. Again, looking at our formula there up above, reorder the string from right to left. So you start with the word report, or at least health report, change one of the nouns to a verb. So like improvement, again, going back to that hidden verb, change that into a noun, improving, and then add a preposition or article so that it makes sense. And when you do all of that, in that interesting formula there, you can go to the right and say, AGB is creating a health report for improving housing safety. That is easier to understand than the one there on the left. So find ways to, again, avoid those noun strings, which ends up making things a little bit convoluted and hard to follow. Okay, plain language principle, avoid jargon. Now, again, if you are writing to a very technical audience that uses a lot of jargon and they can understand it, that is fine, as long as that is the appropriate language for your audience. Again, we don't want to be using words that are unnecessarily difficult to understand, and we certainly don't want to use words just to try to make us look smart, because that's never a good approach to writing. Rather, use words that are best for your audience. So you can see there, jargon is the use of language that is unnecessarily difficult to understand, especially for people who are not familiar with a specific field or topic. Don't use complex or advanced industry terminology simply to impress. Use words your audience knows. Okay, so you can see here, avoid things like pedagogical heuristic. You can just say hands-on learning tool, or an integration with motion scaling and tremor reduction. You can just say a robot that is more precise and less shaky. Or instead of myocardial infarction, you can say heart attack. Now, obviously, if you are in the medical field and myocardial infarction is a very specific type of, heart attack, then maybe you should be using those terms. Of course, again, be thinking about your specific audience. But if you're just trying to say heart attack to an audience who that makes sense to, then certainly use the simpler term there. So avoid that unnecessary complexity. Okay, another plain language principle, write in parallel structure. We talked a little bit about this when we were talking about lists in a previous segment, but we'll just kind of go through this briefly here. Parallel structure means keeping the same pattern or grammatical structure within a sentence or list. So maintaining parallel structure is easier to read. It makes more sense and is more likely to be remembered. So let's look at what parallel structure means in an actual sentence. There on the left, not parallel. Hannah prefers editing the reports, designing graphics, and project management. You'll notice it feels a little bit clunky there at the end. Whereas she prefers editing, designing, and project management. Project management doesn't have that verb phrase. If you change that to be parallel structure, you're going to start each section of that sentence, each part of her list, with the same verb construction. So Hannah prefers editing the reports, designing the graphics, and managing the projects. So you change project management, which is a noun phrase, and turn it into that verb phrase. Okay, so the second example there, my boss took me to attend a conference and golfing trip. That's, again, attend a conference and golfing trip doesn't follow a parallel structure. If you fix that, my boss took me on a conference and on a golf trip, I should say, on a golf trip. Boss took me on a conference and on a golf trip. Okay, and then the last sentence there, Steph would rather receive a higher retirement contribution than health benefits. Okay, and again, rather receive is starting with a verb. If we want to make that parallel, we do that same thing on the right. Steph would rather receive higher retirement contributions than get better health benefits. And that follows a parallel structure. So whether you're doing within a sentence or in a list, you want to make sure you follow that parallel structure. So here's another example of a list. At the beginning of a new year, all employees can expect to receive a 3% salary increase, free parking, getting an annual gym membership. That does not follow parallel format. You see there, that's the infinitive verb to receive, and then you have free parking, which is a noun phrase with an adjective free, and then you have getting, which is kind of that gerund form of the getting an annual or a verb, an ing verb, getting an annual gym membership. Those don't match in parallelism. So how do you fix that? At the beginning of every new year, all employees can expect to receive a colon, salary increase, free parking pass, unlimited gym membership. So those are all nouns: salary increase, free parking pass, unlimited gym membership. So we follow that parallel format. So plain language wants you to use parallel structure. It's going to be a lot easier to read and follow sentence structures there. Okay, well, last thought here in this segment, writing is always a work in progress. Parallel structure is not plain language is not always easy to integrate into everything that we do, but we want to review, revise, and test. So as you write things, as you create things, whether it's websites or reports or other documents that we send out to our employees or clients or customers or whoever they might be, first of all, just ask yourself, did it work? What was the feedback? If it's not working well, people are not understanding the message, maybe look at the plain language, the structure, the format, those types of things. Revise it. Is this something that is fixable? Usually it is. If people are not understanding messages, they can be fixed. Then just ask yourself, what can be better? And then consider testing it. So is your message important enough that it needs a formal review? Is this impacting your company's ability to get sales or get clients, or to communicate complex or important information for safety purposes? Because if so, then you might need a formal review. In that case, maybe you do some copy testing, which is where you have interviews or you put it out and see how people are impacted by it. Or maybe do some usability tests where they use it and then try to apply that language into action and see if it's working. So if you're finding that your communications at different places aren't working all that well, plain language is a good place to start. Also that organization and formatting. All right, well, we're going to move into the last and final segment in Module 3, which is writing better emails. Okay, so we're going to finish Module 3 with 3.5, Writing Better Emails. We'll go through just several tips and tricks for making sure that your email is as efficient and as helpful and effective as it can possibly be. All right, so a few things we think about writing emails at work. A couple of statistics I want to share with you. First of all, 25% of the average office worker's workday is spent writing, and most of that writing does happen in email format. You'll see here 90% of office workers spend up to 5 hours on messenger apps such as email, Slack, and MS Teams. So there's a significant amount of time. We spend 25% of our workday writing, and we're also spending up to 5 hours on these apps. So sometimes that means reading and sending, but also part of that is writing, of course, as well. 121 and 40. The average office worker receives 121 emails per day. They send about 40. So while we don't respond to every email we receive, we're getting a lot and we're sending a lot either way. So this is a significant amount of writing that we're doing with email alone. And so we want to be efficient about it. We want to make sure what we're writing is helpful, whether we can reduce the number of messages that have to go back and forth if we can do it right the first time. So you'll see this thought here. I love this from Dr. Sahar Youssef. She says that she's a cognitive neuroscientist at UC Berkeley, but she says, quote, multitasking is a myth. In reality, it's rapidly switching from one task to another and then back again. And every time you make that switch, you pay a tax on both your time and your energy. For that reason, it's almost always more efficient to monotask. Focus on one thing and move on when you're done, so you don't pay unnecessary switching taxes. And this is going to be a common philosophy for most cognitive scientists, neuroscientists. That multitasking really isn't something our brains can do. They toggle between things. And every time you stop to send an email and then go back to your work and things, that creates a delay. And so I want to start this segment by talking about how to follow some good efficiency best practices with email. Now, there's a concept that you might have heard of. It's called Inbox Zero. Inbox Zero is a concept created by Merlin Mann. It suggests that we should be seeking to declutter our minds by organizing and clearing our email in ways that are effective and efficient. Now, the big misconception about Inbox Zero is that we're supposed to always have 0 emails in our inbox. And that's not what it means. The idea doesn't necessarily mean to have 0 messages in our inbox, but rather to reduce towards 0 the amount of unnecessary mental energy we put into email. So you're going to have emails that are accumulating, especially if you get 121 a day. It's not logical or practical or really that efficient to keep trying to clear an email every time it comes through. In fact, that's counterproductive. The reality is we want to find times in which we can set aside to engage with our email and then clear it out so that we don't have to keep putting mental energy into it. So there's a few principles and best practices to follow the Inbox Zero concept. So first of all is to unsubscribe to anything you don't need. So remove any unnecessary subscriptions, newsletters, or promotions. A lot of times we just start getting these things that we don't actually have all that much interest in. We start deleting emails every day. It's just kind of a waste of time. So start by removing any unnecessary subscriptions. Cancel any unneeded group chats and message lists that you're not really a part of or that you need the messages from. And then establish a secondary promotional folder for necessary subscriptions. So if there are some subscriptions, maybe some professional organizations that you belong to, some newsletters that you need, that's great. Keep them. Just create a folder where you can move those into your a separate space rather than sitting and taking up a space, which causes mental energy in your inbox. So that's the first thing to do. Fairly simple process. The next thing is to categorize. If you have not done this, this is a really important method for clearing out that mental energy. So create some meaningful folders for the types of emails you get. Think of the different types of emails you get and create folders where it makes sense. So like something like clients or vendors or marketing or data, whatever it is that you work with, create some meaningful folders where you can start to categorize your email, which is going to be important for the next step. Nest your folders for clear navigation. So you might have some subfolders and subfolders. So under vendors, you might have electrical vendors. Under electrical vendors, you have specific vendors themselves, so ABC Electric. So this can really help you find important messages later. It also helps you move messages that you don't necessarily need to respond to right away, but that contain important information. So you'll find this method to really help you reduce the amount of time you're spending on each email. And then also create an action folder for emails that need to be addressed, but that you don't necessarily have time for immediately. So you're reducing the size of your inbox, but you're creating one action folder where you still have to respond to those. That's helpful because if you get a lot of emails in a day and you open one up there, oh, I can't respond to this in this moment, it's too complicated. Then you move it to your action folder, and then you set some time every day. Maybe at 9 o'clock every morning, you say, I'm going to do my action folder emails, and you just knock those all out at once. Or maybe you do it twice a day or something like that. But then you're concentrating on your action folder at a very specific and designated time, and you don't have to keep reminding yourself which emails do I need to respond to, what did this one say, and you keep going over the same thing over and over again. Okay, so you'll see this next concept is Ohio, which is the only handle it once method. The idea is once you've opened it, do something with it. So that might be move it into your action folder. It might be to delete it. But the idea is you don't keep reopening the same email over and over and over again. Many of us do that. We open an email, we say, I can't respond to it right now. We just leave it there. Then we come back the next day, we open it up again, we read it again. And sometimes we'll go through several emails multiple times, even in a day or a week. We need to do something with that email. So once you've opened it, do something with it. Either categorize it into one of your folders, respond to it, or archive it into the action folder. Okay, so then we get to the last, which is kind of the most important and the practical aspect of it. It's the 4Ds. Once you've unsubscribed, you categorize your folders, and you have this Ohio method in the back of your mind. These are your 4Ds: delete, delegate, defer, or do. These are the 4 things that you can do with your email, considering that Ohio method. So delete. Well, is it not relevant at all to you and you don't need to archive it or keep it for any purposes? There's no response needed. Just quickly delete it. We can tell usually pretty quickly if it's an email that's relevant to us. If it's not, just hit the delete button. Don't let it sit there in your inbox. Delegate. If you get an email that's not necessarily something you need to respond to, but somebody else could, maybe it's a question that's better answered by somebody else, delegate that. Forward it to the person who can respond to it and just leave it at that. So just quickly delegate. Send it over and say, hey, will you respond to this customer for us? But that way, again, it moves out of your inbox. Defer. Is this not timely? So is this not something you have time to do, or it doesn't matter immediately, or maybe it needs a really long response or something difficult to explain? That's where you defer that one to your action folder. So the ones that do need to be responded to, but you don't have time to that moment, go to your action folder and then do those at that later time. And the last thing is do. Does it need a response? And is it something you can do in the time that you have in that moment? Then hurry and do it. Just you're like, okay, I need a response, respond to them. If it doesn't need a response, but you do need to keep it because it has important information, then save it and archive it in one of your categorized folders. But if you can do this and follow this method, you'll start to just clean out your inbox each day. You don't keep repeating, looking at the same emails over and over again. You don't have to keep asking yourself which ones need attention and which ones don't. So follow that inbox zero theory as a method for clearing out your mental energy that you're putting into that email. All right, so now let's walk through a few general email etiquette and best practices, which are related to communication and writing, but not necessarily writing specific, just kind of some general best practices. So first of all, when you write emails, it should be clear, descriptive. It should have a clear, descriptive, and meaningful subject line. And we're going to get to subject lines next because they are critically important. Okay, number 2 is to write the email before entering the recipient. This is just good best practice. So write all of the content in the email first. The reason is sometimes you might accidentally send the email before you meant to. If you accidentally hit send, you might want to revise it and think about it. But if you put your recipient in that 2-line before you write the email, sometimes it can create mistakes and you send things before you were ready to. Okay, best practice number 3 is to only CC relevant recipients. But then also don't forget important recipients. So it's important that you're not adding people that don't need the message. It's kind of discourteous if you're sending messages to people who don't want or need them. But then also at the same time, if there are people who do need them or would care about them, then certainly add them in so they don't feel left out or offended that you're not including them in the conversation. In some cases, it's helpful to actually ask a person, do you want messages about this particular topic? If so, I will CC them on them in the future. That way they can expect, or sometimes they'll be like, no, I actually don't need that extra clutter in my email. So just make sure you're sending them to the right people each time. Okay, the BCC. Use BCC when it's important to keep recipients' emails confidential. If you're sending them out to an entire organization or to other clients, and you shouldn't be sharing email addresses, that would be a good time to use BCC. Don't use the BCC when recipients need to know specifically who saw the message. So sometimes it's important that everybody knows who saw it. In that case, you want to use the CC and not the BCC. Okay, remember that CC stands for carbon copy. It's a metaphor based on the way we used to create carbon copy paper documents and memos. And then BCC is blind carbon copy, which means it is carbon copied, it's duplicated, but it's blind, meaning that those who receive it can't see who else saw it. But just make sure you're using that appropriately. Okay, double or even triple check that you have the correct recipient. A lot of times there are several people with the same first name in our organization, and sometimes we accidentally send it to the wrong person. That can be embarrassing, but it can also be a breach in privacy if there's confidential or sensitive information. So be very careful that you double check that. Okay, a few more best practices. Hit reply all only when all in the conversation need the entire thread. Sometimes you start a group with 5 or 6 people, but then as the conversation merges into something else, you can remove people who don't need further discussion and conversation. So be careful not to send sensitive information or confidential information to people who shouldn't have access. Sometimes you'll get a confidential email and then reply all or forward it to somebody else that shouldn't see that information. That can be highly problematic. So just be super careful of that. If complex decisions have to be made with several people, consider meeting synchronously. So complex discussions between several people are sometimes hard to do well in an email, and people can get lost in the conversation. If you have 5, 6, or 10 people putting in different comments, thoughts, and perspectives, if someone is gone for a few hours or a couple of days and they come back to that email thread, it can be incredibly difficult to follow that thread, and it really is not efficient. A lot of times you can get together in person or through a video call and cover what you need in just about 15 minutes, or sometimes that kind of conversation can take a couple of days on email. So think about what's more efficient. Think about whether you should be doing that synchronously in person or on video rather than an email. Number 8, remember the email leaves a paper trail. Sometimes meeting in person may make more sense, meaning that if you have something really sensitive or something that might create some controversy, you might want to have an in-person conversation so that you don't say something in an email that can be used against you later. Sometimes we have to be conscious of what is sensitive and what should be face-to-face rather than what needs a confidential paper trail. On the flip side of that, sometimes you're having conversations that you do want a paper trail. You want to have a record of everything that was said and discussed. And so just make sure you're conscious of whether or not you want a permanent record of this or whether or not you don't. Which moves into that number 9. Remember that work email is owned by companies. Everything you send through your work email can be accessed, at least in the United States, by those companies. You don't have privacy necessarily with your company email, so don't use it for personal purposes. Only use it for work-related purposes, and don't be putting in information that you would not want your employers to be able to see or read. Number 10, avoid sending emails when you're angry. Sometimes we can be frustrated or upset, and the knee-jerk reaction is to get into your email and send them a message. But remember that can cause problems later, and that it can be used against you if you said something that you didn't mean. That creates a permanent history. Even if you delete the email, it doesn't mean the person that received it deleted it. And even then, it can still be stored somewhere on a server. So if you're upset, don't send. And again, that's another reason why you may not want to put the recipient's name in the email. Maybe write the email, sit on it for a day or two, and then come back and look at it and see once you've calmed down and distanced yourself from the issue. Lastly, of course, just proofread before sending. Make sure that you're removing any errors, typos, words or phrases that are confusing or anything that might be offensive or inappropriate. So So those are kind of email etiquette best practices. Probably things that you're fairly aware of, but some good things to be thinking about in case there are some areas where you can get a little bit um, or improve upon a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about subject lines. Subject lines are a really important part of email. You'll see there on the left that subject lines are important for three primary reasons. First of all, they grab attention among the clutter. If someone's getting 121 emails a day, as we mentioned, the subject line is going to tell them whether or not it's relevant to them. So make sure that you're using a subject line that does actually encourage them to open it and read it if you feel it's important for them. Communicate the relevance and reduce that auto delete. So if you create a subject line that sounds relevant to somebody, they're more likely to open it and read it rather than just hit the delete button. And then also lastly, good subject lines improve efficiency because they're easier to find later. Rather than having to keep writing the same messages over and over to people, you can just say, hey, I sent you a message like that on this day. Can you just please find it in your archive? Or you can just forward it to them. But if you've written good subject lines, it's significantly easier to find important information later. All right, so let's walk through a few different rules. Subject line rule number 1, keep it short, but not too short. All right, so 25 to 30 characters is what can be read on a cell phone, and there is some research to suggest that about 50% of all email is looked at on a cell phone. Therefore, if your subject line is too long, the entire subject line can't be necessarily read on a cell phone. That said, you don't necessarily have to fit everything to accommodate cell phones, but you don't want to go much longer than 25 to 30 characters. Subject lines over 50 characters tend to not grab attention, so there's some other interesting research that suggests if you create a subject line that's too long, it tends to turn people away from their email, and they're slightly less likely to open it, even if it's important. One-word subject lines don't typically say enough. So again, you don't want to be too long, but you also don't want to be too short. If it's just a one-word subject line, it doesn't help us to know what's in the subject line. So 3 to 5 words is often the sweet spot. So here's an example of too short. If you just have a subject line that says Friday, that doesn't really help. But also if it's too long and we say, we will be seeing some important changes to our meeting on Friday, that's too long. You've now gone over the 50-character limit. So find that sweet spot. Friday's meeting, important changes. Okay, Friday's meeting, important changes. That's going to be a 4-word phrase. We got fewer than 50 characters. It does tell us what the email is going to be about, and it encourages us to open it. So that's a little bit better. So that first one, keep it short, but not too short. Okay. Subject line rule number 2, state your key point of the message. That should be directly in the subject line. Say exactly what the email is about. Think of the subject as a brief summary of the message. The subject line should be a brief summary of the entire message. Then just be as specific as possible. And sometimes it helps if you try adding a verb. If you can't think of what to put, be thinking, what's the action that is actually being described in the email? Sometimes that can help. So for example, too vague is project. Well, that doesn't really tell us the key point of the message. But if you add a verb in there, the word are, and you name the project, so we have Axis 1 project deadlines are shifting. Okay, that's a little bit more specific. Now the recipient's going to go, oh, the Axis 1 project deadlines are changing. I should be opening this email to see what the shifts or the changes are. Okay, so again, you got the kind of the sweet spot. You added a verb. It's more specific. You're stating the point of the message. All right. Subject line rule number 3, limit the use of urgency. Sometimes we want to put important or urgent on all of our emails. Well, it's the whole boy who cried wolf issue. If you keep saying everything's urgent, then nothing feels urgent. So only use this sparingly when things really are urgent. Only make emails appeal urgent if it's absolutely critical, if it's very, very important in that moment. Use punctuation and urgency terms sparingly. So exclamation points, important, urgent, those types of terms, use them very sparingly. Only use them, again, when it's very critical. And then clarify urgency in the subject line. So if it's very important, you do want to put that in there. Okay, so example, it's too vague, and maybe we've got too... we're not sure what is important. we just have a couple of exclamation points or words that say read now or important. That's not all that helpful. And then if you have several exclamation points and it's read now, sometimes that can seem a little bit abrasive or offensive. It also seems less professional. If you put something like that, their lives better be on the line, and it better be extremely important. And even then, I would still add, danger. Your life is in danger! Exclamation point. So that it's not too vague. You can see better if you do have something that's urgent. Maybe put one exclamation point and the word urgent, and then put submission deadline changed to March 1st. Okay, so make sure you kind of understand how urgent it is, and then don't use those terms very often, or they can lose their effect when something really is urgent. Okay, subject line rule number 4, avoid repeat subject lines. This can sometimes be hard to do because we send so many emails, but if you can, as best you can, change the subject line to increase reading. There's some research to suggest that if you have the same subject line over and over and over again, people are less likely to open it. It starts to seem redundant. It starts to seem like they've already read that message, so they don't open it. Different subject lines are also easier to locate later. So again, if you're going to archive them for later access, create different subject lines. Sometimes it's just a subtle change, like adding the date or something inside the subject line, but changing the dates help. And then add dates when appropriate. So a couple examples here. So if you just keep writing Thursday's meeting, Thursday's meeting, Thursday's meeting, that's the same message we keep seeing. It gets confusing. It's hard to know if it's the different email than before, if it's a repeat email or something like that. So, fix that a little. You can say agenda, April staff meeting, and then put the date, 4/11, or agenda, May staff meeting, 5/13. So that's a more specific and clear. You can see there is a modification there with the date and the name of the month, but we're getting some adjustment in those phrases there. It's going to be a little bit better. Okay, the subject line rule number 5, avoid all caps. All caps look like spam. People tend to delete those quicker. All caps look like false urgency. Sometimes it makes it look like you're really urgent, but maybe it's not as much. All caps is also harder to read, generally speaking. Not that hard, but it's a little harder for our brains to read in all caps. And then all caps can also look like yelling. And if that's not the message you want to send, don't put it in all caps because it looks like you're kind of mad at them. So you'll notice here using all caps. Come to healthcare benefit meeting. If that's in all caps, it kind of looks loud and yelly. Project is due Friday, or I need the report. All those in all caps. It gets to be a little bit loud and hard to read. The better. Invitation, staff meeting on new healthcare plan, or project meeting moved to Friday, or please send me the report. Okay, all of these are going to be better not in all caps. All right, so enough of the subject line. We'll look at a few other things to be thinking about when it comes to writing your emails. First of all, short but not too short as a guideline also works for the message itself. So it's good for your subject line, but also for the message. You want to make sure that the message itself is just your key message. Don't give a lot of extra information. Again, you want to respect people's time, and an enormous amount of text can really pull someone's productivity down. Just give people what they need to know in that moment and move forward. That's best practice. Is better for efficiency, and really people will appreciate that. Consider writing separate emails for separate issues. Don't overwhelm with long, complex messages. So while it can seem a little bit counterintuitive to create more email, if you create one long email with several complex issues, sometimes that can be, first of all, harder to find later, but also it's a little more difficult for someone to respond to multiple issues at once. In a single email, it's easier to say, I'm going to respond to this particular problem in this email and that particular problem in that email, and you can separate them and find them a little bit better. All right, third thing there, keep paragraphs to 5 lines or fewer. You can see in the photo there on the left that those paragraphs are 2 to 3 lines long. You usually want to go 2 to 3 is great. 5 is kind of the maximum. If you start creating paragraphs that are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 lines long, it gets to be really heavy and dense text, and it's really difficult to read, especially if someone's reading their email on a wide monitor where it spaces the text out a long ways. Really hard to follow and read. So Keep them very short, usually 2 to 3 sentences, 5 lines or fewer. Add space between paragraphs. Again, create that visual space, that organizational structure, and some of the things we talked about in formatting and organization matter for email as well. And then also at the same time, again, short is good, but if it's too short, it can sound terse or upset, or abrasive. So avoid responding with only a single word or phrase. Be courteous with a full response and answer all that is needed. If someone asks you 2 or 3 questions, don't just say yes, or don't only answer one of them. Respond in full, but then also think words like yes or no. If it's just a single answer, they can sound a little bit rude. So if someone asks you this question, you say, yes, that will absolutely work. Thanks for asking, or something like that. Just add a few more words to make it feel more polite. You don't want people to start believing that you're always mad or always angry. That may not be the case, but the way that you write those messages can sometimes be interpreted that way. So just the short but not too short as a guideline. Okay, use lists and space to shorten text, simplify, and draw attention. This goes back to some of our formatting things that we talked about in the previous sections. But again, apply that same principle to email. You can see this email, there's a lot there. If you take the time to read it, it's following a step-by-step process, but it's all buried in one paragraph. If I show you the after message, you'll see here it's a little longer in terms of its vertical spacing, but the one on the right is going to be a lot more readable. Your audience is going to be able to understand it better. They're going to follow it better. They're going to be more inclined to want to read it. It's just, and if they have to refer to it later, in this particular email, it's instructions. So if they've got 7 steps of instructions, it's going to be a lot easier to follow that if you give them a numerical list. So again, find ways to use list in email. It's going to be a better approach there. All right, also use highlighting techniques to draw attention. There's some visual cues that you can use in email that will help pull people into what's important. So a few highlighting rules. First of all, that one there at the top, never highlight more than 10% of a message. Again, it's that whole, the more you highlight, the less the highlighting means. If you emphasize everything, then nothing is emphasized. You usually just highlight 1 or 2 phrases, something that's very important in that moment to your audience. Don't use color alone to highlight if somebody is colorblind, or if you need to print an email in black and white. The color itself doesn't always stand out in the way that you hope it will. So use multiple methods to highlight. You can definitely use color, just use a secondary method that's in addition to color so that it stands out. So you consider things like bold, underline, italics, or the font size itself. At the same time, while you can use more than one highlighting technique at once, like you can make it bold and red and underlined, you don't want to use more than 3. So 3 is good: bold, red, underlined, bold, and green. Green, underline, green, italic, something like that, but don't use 7. You don't need to use 7 highlighting techniques. You don't need to make it bigger, a different color, underlined, italics, bold, all that at once. Just use 2 or 3 at a time. And then use only when necessary. Be careful not to suggest anger or frustration in the way that you use highlighting techniques. Like if you make it too big or too bold or too red or whatever else, sometimes that can communicate anger or frustration. But you'll see here in this example the benefit of using some highlighting techniques. If you have an important date that you need people to pay attention to, you make it red, you make it underlined, you make it bold. That draws attention. It helps them know that this is important. Again, 1 or 2 maybe phrases or concepts in an email when there's something important. Draw attention using highlighting techniques. All right, and then you want to find ways to use images and graphics. We live in a world that is so visually accessible. They're so easy to create video or to create photo or to create drawings. Sometimes if you have something complex, you can just take a screenshot and send that. Say, hey, this is the code I'm using right now, or this is the website I'm looking at. This is the problem I see. Just take a quick screenshot and send that as an attachment or as an inline photo. Go ahead and draw a picture on a piece of paper, a diagram. There are a lot of tools now that make this easier. You can create data visualizations, diagrams, flowcharts, things like that. So if you find yourself trying to describe something complex, think, is there a more visual way I can do this for my audience? So a few images and graphics thoughts and best practices. First of all, use images, screenshots, and graphics to improve the clarity of a message to clarify a complex issue. Use emojis sparingly, typically only to people you communicate with often. So if it's coworkers you have a really strong relationship with, colleagues and things like that, sometimes you can do that. More and more, increasingly, they are considered acceptable in business communication, at least in the United States and in certain industries. Make sure you're following common protocol and that you're not doing it inappropriately. But the good thing about emojis is that they can communicate emotion sometimes in ways that is difficult to with text alone. So use them specifically to communicate emotion. If there's something that you think is kind of funny or lighthearted, sometimes a small emoji can help. I would not use these regularly. Sometimes they can make you look less professional, but in those moments, to the right people with a specific emotion, you might consider it again if it's appropriate in your culture and with your particular company. Okay, and then lastly, consider adding images inline rather than as attachments to improve reading and reduce firewall blocks. Sometimes email, especially in organizations, they'll block attachments, but you're less likely to have that blocked if you put the photo inline. Inline just means it's directly within the content itself. Most email platforms make that fairly simple. As you add an attachment, you can choose to make a photo inline or as an attachment. So as you choose the photo button, you can make that decision. But inline, it'll just read a little bit smoother sometimes within the copy of the email itself. So if you say, hey, look at this diagram, put it right in the email. It's a little easier than saying, open up this attachment and look at it separate from the email. So just be helpful, be thinking about how to work directly with your audience, and it's about them and making your message easier for them. All right, well, that's a wrap in terms of email itself, but also in terms of Module 3 and also in terms of this entire course. So we've learned a lot about communication, written communication, team communication, and just best practices in communication generally, written communication. I hope you've gotten some valuable things out of this course and hope to see you in another course at some point. We're going to close out now.